Welcome to the America First podcast, where truth is spoken without fear. Welcome, everybody, to the America First podcast. My name is Linda Barton, and I am here today with Texas State Representative James White. James, do you want to say hello to everybody today?
Yes, thank you so much, Linda. I am extremely proud to represent 170,000 of the best set of Texans in the state of Texas in Polk, Tyler, Jasper, Newton, and Hardin counties. And I am just ecstatic that one of my constituents in my home county is a central figure in this great organization that is aiming towards rebuilding our local prosperity, maintaining safe communities in Texas and throughout this country, and is very interested in seeing our kids get great education, securing our borders. So this is extremely exciting, and I am just turning somersaults in a symbolic way, okay?
Well, I am thrilled that you gave of your busy schedule to take time today to share your views on what we need to do to make America great again. It's a daunting task, I know, but with all of us pulling together, I know we can do it.
Yes.
Now, what inspired you to get into politics, first thing? Let's touch on that one.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I just think you just go back to some of the basics. I think it was Aristotle that said, either you're part of politics, because politics is going to eventually be about you. But, I really just think it involves, Linda, being able to serve another fellow citizen, another fellow human. I think that is one of the highest callings that we can have, especially those of us that are believers out there. But it's one of the highest callings that we can have in our life, to desire to serve, then to serve. And I think it comes with a special sense of responsibility when your fellow citizens evaluate you and raise you up for a temporary period of time to serve. So that is a driving aspect of it. And I think humans are God's most complex and creative creation, so to speak. And it's always a fascinating process to see humans come to these decisions in a collective way.
I agree completely. I do. How do you feel about President Trump's America First agenda? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are, how is that different from those men and women that fought on the cold, icy battlefields from Valley Forge to Bunker Hill to Yorktown? I think they were America first. How different is it from those that have those forefathers that tracked across the Midwest to the Great West, making this country great? I just think it's an extension of that. When I think of the America First Project, every soldier in every fighting position, from the Civil War through the First World War, through the Second World War, and all conflicts that our soldiers have fought in, I think they have fought under the premise of America first. When I think about, our observance of Martin Luther King yesterday, I think he was about making America great again. And it's the idea is that every generation has this task, not just to make it great again or more, but we owe something to the next generation. I remember when I was in the Army, Linda, we would always have to, we would go to these really rundown, raggedy barracks to go to training when I was in college to become an infantry officer. And so we would go train for like 3 days, and then we would use another 2 or 3 days cleaning the place up. And in frustration, I turned to my training officer and said, "Sir, why are we spending so much time cleaning these raggedy World War I, World War II barracks?" And he said, "Cadet, because in the Army we have an ethic. We always leave it better than we found it.
Mm-hmm. Very
and that
true.
has stayed with me. So leaving it better than we found it is making America great again. And I don't see how this is any different from what our forefathers and foremothers did in generations past.
I agree completely. I agree. Yeah. I'm an Air Force brat, so I understand the whole military
Yes, ma'am.
thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay,
yes, ma'am.
now.
And I think they wake up to make America great again every morning. They wake up and don their uniform.
They sure do. My husband and I were over-the-road truck drivers for several years. Well, he was a lot longer than me, but I was out there with him for 10 years. And when the war started, we started hauling the military freight, the sensitive military freight. And so we spent a lot of time at the different bases, quite a bit of time out at Fort Hood, as a matter of fact, going between Fort Hood and Beaumont or down to Corpus Christi, taking their weapons and everything to and from so that they could either go or they were coming back. And I had the proud honor to get to talk to so many of our bravest. And I would ask them, why did you join? And it was the same story over and over again, because I love this country. And, I remember seeing those fresh young faces. And, I have children their age. I have children that are older than them. And I remember I would give them a hug, and I would tell them, please come home safely to us and come home with all the parts you went over there with, because so many of them were coming back losing limbs and everything. And they just held their heads high and yes, ma'am. And so I totally understand that we really need to take more time and focus on our military and pay them back for the freedom that they've given us. That's important.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so
yes,
now, let me see, where do I want to go now? Now, you mentioned about faith and everything when you was first talking.
Yes.
When we say traditional Christian values, what does that mean to you?
Well, what it means to me is that we are all, come from the fallen nature. And even with that, decisions matter. The decisions that we make today matter for future generations, right? The decision that Adam and Eve made impacted future decisions that other people had to make, okay? And so the idea that we are of the fallen nature, our decisions matter, our decisions to, first of all, humble ourselves, that we need salvation, that we need self-improvement, that we need to always first look, self-introspection instead of always pointing our finger to inspect someone else, okay? And that we need that saving grace from Christ, because every day we fall short of the glory of God.
Okay, very good. Yes, I agree. Now, so often in the media, we hear pundits and those on the opposite side of the aisle in the Democratic Party go on and on about the importance of separation of church and state. What does that mean to you, that term?
Oh, gosh. I hope that never happens in our country. I hope it never happens in our country. What I reminded people throughout this latest weekend is that every great movement, every great transformation of this country, whether it be the first great awakening with the American Revolution, the second great awakening that resulted in the abolition of slavery, and what we know of today as the modern civil rights movement, which began in the 50s and culminated in the 60s with the Civil Rights Act of, I believe, 64. Those movements were inspired either from the pulpits of the nation and or the hearts of people that sat in the congregations, where they first, knowing that they are of the fallen nature and that if they were going to improve this country, they first had to look at how they treated each other if they wanted to get an idea of how God would treat them and judge them ultimately. So, my gosh, I hope we never have separation of church and state. Where would we be? Where would, we would not have had the MLK observance. I don't know where our country would have been if we would have had separation of church and state. Would we have had a revolution that ended in a Republican, small r form of government based on the virtue of the people, okay, if it wasn't for that involvement of the church in the hearts and minds of those men and women that fought that war, that gained our national independence. So I would hope that we would never have separation of church and state. I mean, I believe it was Alexis de Tocqueville that said, after in the 1830s, after traveling throughout the country, trying to find out, the differences between the American experience with revolution and popular government and the French experience with revolution, popular government that actually ended up in a dictatorship, a military dictatorship with Napoleon. He said he found it in the churches, and that America will always be great if America stays good, and that's virtue, and virtue derives from a large part from our religious experiences.
Exactly. Well, it's quite sad how the progressives, in the Democrat Party have decided what separation of church and state means when it doesn't mean what they say. If you read the Constitution, it doesn't say that you can't have God-fearing people serving in government. It says nowhere in there. It just says we're not supposed to have a government-mandated religion. That's where that whole freedom of religion comes in.
Yes, and we have no religious test on serving in government.
Exactly.
If you want to, it's no religious test. But in the genius of our constitutional framers, I think their thought was religion is in your heart. Faith is in your heart, not in government. Okay.
Exactly.
And I think as conservatives, we need to take a deep breath. Especially when we talk about these very sensitive issues of faith and religion, I know it's always good to, and I know what you're doing, okay, but I know it's always good to point at the other guy. But it's also a time for me to look at myself from introspection. Am I presenting myself in a way that is understanding and loving? Not necessarily tolerable, okay? I think there's a difference, okay? But understanding and loving and not judgmental all the time.
Exactly.
Okay? We have to make judgments, but I think there's a difference between making judgments and decisions and being judgmental and intolerable. So we can do a little bit better, and I try to be a little bit better. I think when we talk about faith and religion, we need to put more eyes in there, right? That, to be understanding, not tolerating, but definitely not intolerable and loving.
Right, exactly. Now, with yesterday being, a day of recognition of Dr. Martin Luther King, one thing that I did notice is I don't hear the word reverend attached to his name much anymore.
Yes. And that's unfortunate because I'm going to tell you, and I think it's in this ethic of separation of church and state, okay? And let me tell you, listening and reading his sermons, this was by far one of our greatest evangelists of our time, and definitely throughout the history of this country. I remember either reading or listening to him, and he told a group of black people in a church that, their eventual freedom would not come by how the government or white people were treating us as American blacks. It would eventually come by us showing how their treatment of us impacts their relationship with God.
Exactly.
That's how you get a transformation. Okay, everybody's always jumping around saying how they're a victim, right? But the point is, how does my treatment of my fellow man, okay, how does that impact my walk? Not necessarily with the government, okay, or getting elected, but how does it impact me? Okay, and so that's unfortunate. And I was listening, I believe, to Laura Ingraham yesterday, and I think she brought that up, and she had a few clips I was listening to on her radio podcast, and I think she's trying to relive that this was one of the great evangelists of our nation's history as well.
Yeah, he was. I mean, his words were so profound.
Yes.
And he just—it's a shame. It's a shame that his memory and the battle that he fought so hard for has been twisted and distorted and made into something totally different. Yeah.
Different. And let me touch on that, because I would say his writings and his speeches transcended any type of partisanship.
Exactly.
And I think for whatever reason, on whatever side of the aisle, okay, people have tried to co-opt that, okay, and in co-opting it, they have secularized it.
Exactly.
The modern civil rights movement was not a secular movement, okay. This was a movement spearheaded by pastors who also had to look into themselves and convict themselves, because on Wednesday and Sunday nights, how could you continually tell your congregations that God loves you and that you will go to heaven and you've been saved, but yet on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, okay, you're treated as a third-class citizen. So I believe they knew they had to step up as well for their legitimacy in the pulpit.
Yeah, it's something that I hope someday somebody can pick up where he left off and speak with the same profound strength that he did.
Yes, and moral clarity.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Now, an important question as a Texan.
Okay.
I already know the answer, but the listeners don't. Can you please give me your stand on the Second Amendment?
I believe the Second Amendment is very absolute. The Second Amendment restricts the federal government, that is the Congress, from making any law that infringes on the rights of the people to carry weapons and to use them. And that the idea is that the people collectively throughout this country, they are the militia. Hopefully, on all times, we will never have to call up the militia. Okay, we can square away these things at the ballot box, right? But that's it. It is one of the checks that we have on government, and that's why I'm a very strong proponent of it. And this is why I'm also a very strong proponent of it. You know, we have some assumptions about popular government where the people are sovereign with where there's a constitution that's sovereign, and the people elect their representatives. And the assumption is that only a virtuous people that know of their rights and their interests deserve the right to self-govern. And because the American people have proven day after day, generation after generation, that they are a virtuous people, they deserve the right to self-government in this country. And why is that? It's because they have a level of virtue to know when their interests are being deprived, and if need be, use implements of destruction, that's firearms, to protect their rights and interests, or to regain their rights and interests. So when people radically question, and I say radically question because obviously I think there's no disagreement that people that are struggling with mental illness, children at a certain age, they do not have the level of virtue to use these implements of destruction, right? But when we want to make these radical infringements on the Second Amendment, literally what we're saying is that the people of this country and this state do not lack the virtue of self-government. And this elected official who is proud that his citizens have lifted him up on their shoulders to the State House in Austin, I don't want to say that my citizens that I think are right in electing me, but are not virtuous enough to have implements of destruction, that is firearms, to protect their rights and interests.
That's good to hear. Now, I do have a question. There are several in the higher-up leadership of the Democratic Party that have made comments about how people that served in the military may not be of a mental state to own a firearm. What is your thoughts on that statement?
Well, I think that's utterly silly. You did not question their ability to, I think as one great philosopher said, you didn't question their ability to protect and guard your rights and liberties and your safety in the far reaches of the night overseas. So now when they come here, you question that. Look here, Linda, we already have procedures in place. You know, you cannot deprive people of their rights and liberties without due process. So we already have procedures in place to take care of certain situations, okay? What you have just stated, that many people have stated in Congress and around this country on the other side of the aisle, I just think is absolutely repugnant.
I agree. I agree.
Yes.
It scares me when I see them trying to label our military people as mentally unfit. I guess that's the nicest way to put it. I'm glad to hear you feel the same way. That's an important issue to us over here at the America First Coalition. That's very important. Okay. Now, I have a daughter who is a police officer in Vidor, and I was kind of wondering what your views are on how law enforcement is handled today, how it's been treated, and what is your opinion of how we can make it better for our police officers?
Well, I believe our law enforcement, our Leos in blue, sometimes they wear black, but those great men and women are being treated very badly. They're being treated in a very disrespecting way. When I was growing up, my mother and father taught me to, number one, you obey all adults, right? Okay? But you obey your teachers, you obey law enforcement. If you have a problem, I'm supposed to report that back to my mother and my father. I'm not supposed to be out there pushing back. I'm not supposed to be out there spitting and cussing and definitely not shooting at law enforcement. So I would like to start by that. You know, folks understand there is a standard for the rule of law. As an elected official, particularly as a legislator, Linda, my job is to do what? Make the laws. If you have a problem with the law, you need to come to the legislature or the Congress or your city council. Those men and women that stand behind that badge, they're only enforcing the law that the elected representatives of the people have enacted.
That's true.
So do we need to change some things in our criminal code? Currently, I serve as the House chair of the Corrections Committee, and we're always working on that because ultimately, whether you're an officer or a citizen, you're subservient to the Constitution, okay? You know, we all serve under the Constitution. You know, it's God, the Constitution, the people, and then the elected officials at the bottom, right? Okay, so that's the first thing. okay? When you disrespect law enforcement, you're disrespecting our Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
You're disrespecting our flag,
Mm-hmm.
okay? So we need to uphold these men and women, because you and I know they're not even paid a fraction of what they provide us in the deep reaches of the night while we're asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the things that they have to see consistently from night to night. So we need to uphold, we need to champion these people, okay? Because we champion our rights and our liberties, and you can't have it both ways. You can't say you're a champion of the flag, you're a champion of the Constitution, you're a champion of rights and liberties, and then you're running down the police. As in any profession, you know, you always have a few that you have to discipline, but the vast majority of our law enforcement officers are just like, I believe you said, your daughter, invite her. There are daughters, there are uncles, there are sons, there are dads. These are the people, okay? And we need to respect them. Period.
Wonderful. I agree completely. Okay, what is your view, your personal view on states' rights?
Thank you so much for that. It's constitutional. Let's start there. Okay. That's our 10th Amendment. All powers that the Constitution doesn't give to the Congress, or given, or it's understood that those powers, rest with the states and the people respectively. The Constitution is a contract, okay, so to speak. And I have to tell people this: the states created the federal government, the national government. The state legislatures, created the national government. I love my U.S. Congressman Babbitt. I think he's a great guy, but you know, I haven't had to do this because he's a strong conservative. But I will remind him that I created you. You exist because of the state legislatures. Okay? And so the state legislatures created the federal government to do few and defined powers and responsibilities. And then the states were left with many undefined powers and responsibilities. And it was all about this idea of the extended republic and the compound republic. The extended republic, that as our republic grows, political interests will grow, political interests will change, and that's how you have sort of a check on the power of different interests among the people. And also you would check government by having this compound republic. So you would have the national government, and then you would have the state government, and that there would be a healthy competition between these two spheres of government, but still they were to remain in their lane, okay? And I think one of the reasons a lot of things have got out of whack in this country is because either one sphere of government has been violated because the latter sphere did not live up virtuously to its constitutional role. So, again, thinking about this, our last weekend of observance of Reverend King and his accomplishments, the reason why a lot of things had to be done nationally, and maybe the national government kind of got into that lane, right, that we probably wouldn't have wanted it in, is because too many of our state legislatures allowed unvirtuous, unconstitutional, and immoral things to go on in their states. So as a state legislator, what I would say is I created the national government, but that does not give me license to disrespect the people's rights and just say I can do whatever I want to do because I'm a state legislature and this is not a federal role. So, But then I would say the same thing on the federal side. Just because they do have the right of the power to tax, they do have the power to borrow, they do have the power to send our men and women to war, that is not an excuse for them to overreach in their powers. And again, that's when we expect the state legislatures to stand up and check that power when it's not used appropriately.
Very well said. Very well said. Okay, I have a question to ask you. As a politician, I'm curious to see your view on this. So often there's been a cry for term limits. There's been too many that have been in power way too long, got a little bit too comfortable. What's your view on term limits?
Well, first of all, I believe the ultimate term limit is the ballot box.
Okay.
And again, as I've sort of, well, I'm not finished now. And as I've alluded to before, sometimes you may need to use another term limit. Okay, but hopefully we never get to that term limit. But with that, the framers of our state constitution and our national constitution, they knew we would have a changing society. Okay, and that they did put some provisions in place where we could make thoughtful amendments to our Constitution. I think when the framers created the Constitution, they never thought about how the elected officials would co-opt the system, and I'm starting with the legislature, okay, where they would co-opt the system and put vast powers and consideration into seniority. Committee appointments, the influence of money, okay, and I think they could not have, as we would say when I was a football coach, they could not have scouted the future and say this would have happened. So incumbents today have advantages and tools that legislators never had in 1788, 1789, okay?
Very true.
To aggrandize and grow their power. So I would say yes, there is a role for some thoughtful term limits now, okay? Now, you'll go back and see where I've been critical of the way the Texas legislature have done term limits, because what the Texas legislature has done in the past, they have wanted to impose a term limits on the executive branch, but not term limits on themselves. So it's important that when we do this, we have balance. If you think about the Texas Constitution or the U.S. Constitution, it's about balance, okay? So if you limit the terms of the governor and the other executive officers in the Texas government, and you don't try to do that with the state legislature, then you're going to have an imbalance there, right? Okay? And then it's about undermining in a constructive way the aggrandizement of power. So I think most of us would say a governor or an executive branch official on the state or federal level, when you get to about year 8, that's when you are probably aggrandizing power. And I think George Washington has set a standard there for executive officers. And I think he got it right. When you get to about 8 years, you're well beyond just finding out where the restroom is in the Capitol, okay? It all becomes about you now, okay? Now, when you look at the Texas House of Representatives, we serve 2-year terms at the pleasure of our folks back home. We would say in 4 years, you haven't aggrandized any power. So I would think because it's a legislative chamber is made up of many members that always check each other, right? Because there's so many of us, okay? Right. You think a 2-year term, member of the Texas House or member of the U.S. House, maybe at about 10 to 12 years, okay? It's getting to be about the aggrandizement of power, okay? when you look at our upper chambers, may they be the Texas Senate or the U.S. Senate. Now, the Texas Senate has 4-year terms, not 6-year terms like our U.S. Senate. So when you look at our Texas Senate, when you look at our Texas Senate, you want to think maybe at about year 12. Okay. You know, it's probably more about the aggrandizement of power instead of the constructive use of power on behalf of the people. So I would tell my legislative colleagues, term limits, yes, but you bust everybody at the same time to maintain that constitutional balance.
I like that. I like that very much. Okay. As a Texan, the border is a big issue for us. What is your view and opinion of President Trump wanting to build the wall? Now, we know it's not going to be a solid wall all the way across, but what is your view on his desire to secure our border?
I think it's already statute.
Really? You don't know that by hearing the news.
Yes, I think that's already a statute that was passed during the Bush administration. So we definitely favor our Congress fulfilling statutes that are on the books. And so we're supportive of the president on this measure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm an old infantry officer, right? And we know that any barrier that you put in, you still have to have some type of physical guarding of it. Okay, so and then it has to make sense, right? So yes, there are parts of the Rio Grande, Texas-Mexico border where it's a mountainous, rocky cliff. Okay. From efficiency standpoint and effectiveness standpoint, there's no reason to put a wall there. Okay, but you'll use some other techniques. Okay, because as you start putting up this wall, the bad guys are going to still either try to go under it, find ways to go over it, or exploit places where it is not there because it wasn't really, no feasibility for it to be there. So we're supportive of this along with other measures. So this is obviously very important to us in Texas, but it should be very important to us all over, the country. So we have to make sure that any immigration policy conforms to our interests and values as Americans, and with that makes us great, as well as providing the great opportunity for immigrants to come here. It's got to be a two-way street, okay? America is not just about a job. America is about an idea.
Yes.
It's about a value. So it's not just about a job. Now, obviously, prosperity, individual, community, state, national is a big deal for everybody, right? But America is about a promise. It's about a principle, not just about a job. Okay, and it's in. I'm not one to really say that immigrating to this country should necessarily be easy. I don't think it should be bureaucratic, where we're wasting a lot of money and a lot of people's time and resources. But I'm not here to say that I think it should be something easy. Okay,
right.
It should be hard to penetrate the security apparatuses of this country. Okay? All right. So every president, every chief executive officer with their legislative counterparts, their first responsibility is to maintain the security of this country so our people can exercise their liberties in a virtuous manner. So we're very supportive of these measures to harden our border security, may it be at the ports of entry, may it be at the Rio Grande. Security is the first principle of war. You never violate it.
I agree. Well, another issue that's in the news right now, and there's a lot of bickering going on in D.C. about it, and I was just curious about, as a Texas representative, how you feel on the subject of DACA.
Thank you so much for that. And I would say, Linda, I'm very, very appreciative in how the president has handled this. I believe in the Constitution it says Congress has the power. We give Congress the power to establish immigration and naturalization laws, not through the convenience of an executive order. So any DACA compromise, because that's really what it's going to be, okay? Because we know that in the pure sense, it should be go back, get back at the end of the line, and then make your way up, okay? But I think the president has been very, very thoughtful about the practicality of things. So anything dealing with DACA, matter of fact, anything dealing with immigration, period, you've got to be more thoughtful. We can't have chain migration, okay?
I agree.
We've got to find a way to make sure that is more thoughtful. Yes, regardless of the some of the misinformation out there, some of the proposals that I've seen from the administration and the Republicans in Congress, they recognize that families need to stay together, okay? But this thing where somebody can come in, even illegally, and sit for a while and then become the conduit for many, many other people, we've got to get a handle on that, okay?
Exactly.
So it has to come with that. And, I was when I was at the teaching in the college and the high school, I taught economics, and isn't it kind of interesting that with the drop in the border crossings, you've actually seen also a drop in the unemployment rate, and we're seeing signs of an increase in the wage rate. Okay. So you can't keep flooding the zone with low-skilled labor and then holler about wages.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just simple economics, right? I mean, the more market supply you have, it tends to have a downward pressure on prices, and in this case, a price is a wage. So we've seen border crossings significantly drop even without congressional action. We're seeing reports of Hispanic and black employment decreasing substantially. We're seeing wages go up, okay, which is what we needed. Okay, and so some of these dire scenarios that people have talked about just haven't happened. Actually, it's worked in favor of native labor.
Exactly. I grew up. Well, my father, when he retired from the Air Force, we settled in California, and I was living in Woodland, California, which is north of Sacramento. Very strong agricultural area. At least it was back then. It's kind of losing it today. But anyway, I remember the people from Mexico would come up. They would work during the harvest season. They'd make their money. They might have 4 or 5 families living in one house. And then when the season was over, they would go back to Mexico until the following one. You don't see that today. They come, they stay, and I'm sorry, we keep hearing the same old line of they're doing work that we don't want to do. I know a lot of men in construction, their wages got slashed because of low-income workers coming here. Truck driving, my husband, drove for 35 years, and same thing. So the line of they'll do work that Americans won't isn't true. They have just driven down the wages over the years to where it wasn't cost effective to stay doing what you were doing. At least that's my opinion on it. So
yes, agreed.
Okay, another area I want to ask you about that has been controversial for a while is what is your view on the refugee program that we've had to endure the last few years of the Obama administration?
Well, again, it was not based on any type of security posture. It's one thing when you don't know what's going to happen. It's another thing when your enemy is telling you what they're going to do. And then it's a completely different thing on the third sense when they actually do it and start harming you. Okay? And you say, well, who's the fool? Who's stupid? Well, it's got to be you. Okay? So we saw in Europe where these terrorist organizations were using the compassion of our allies in Europe to infiltrate their country and to inflict terror on their people. And then how they're trying to use that as a conduit to come to the United States. So the idea that you would have these refugee programs occurring, and when I think about refugee programs that are coming from failed states, it shouldn't be mostly men. The men should be back in their country fighting to free their country, right?
I thought the same thing myself.
When I think of refugees fleeing a failed war zone, I'm thinking more women, children, the elderly, the sick, the frail. Okay. And my concern with it was the lack of coordination with state partners, where they're just planting these groups into our communities, onto our schools, not knowing if our schools can take this additional load. So it's all of that. So look, we will always have an immigration policy that's consistent with our national values and our interest. Okay, that's no doubt about it. I have no doubt in my mind that if there are people overseas being persecuted only because of their religion in a certain country, this president and this Congress is going to use the U.S. as a place of refuge. I have no doubt about that.
Yes.
But this thing about where the UN or some nonprofit was conducting a security check and clearing these folks without our security apparatus, may it be the FBI and or the CIA, also doing security vetting. That's just, Linda, that's just silly.
I agree.
And actually what it does is it undermines the confidence of the American people that the government officials do know the values and interest of this country and how our immigration policy is supposed to support that.
I agree completely. I mean, as an American, I want people that come here that want to be an American. I want them to feel the same love and pride in this country as I do. You know, this is, you know, the United States has always been the nation of dreams. And
yes, not a job.
People came here wanting to become an American. I remember years ago, back in the early 80s, when I was still living out in California. That was back when I was a hairdresser. I've worn all sorts of different hats over my life. But anyway, I was working at a salon in Davis, California, where, you know, the University of Davis is. Everybody knows of that university. And it was right after the fall of the Shah of Iran and all that had happened. And I had a woman come in one day. I was going to do her hair for her. And she was a very prim and proper woman. I found out she was a professor. Her and her husband were both professors at the University of Tehran. And they had to flee in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. It was them and their 2 daughters. Because there were hit squads out for anybody that was educated. And because of that, they had to flee in the middle of the night, and they were given refuge here in the United States. The first words out of her mouth was, "I am so honored to get to come to this great country, and I look forward to giving it my best." And I thought, that is the type of person that we need to have come here, somebody that is thankful for the opportunities we have here, and somebody that wants to become part of it. And it was really cute. About a week later, her daughter came in. She had a 16-year-old daughter. and she had this long, gorgeous black hair, thick, beautiful black hair. She comes walking in the door. I'll never forget. She's got on blue jeans, cowgirl boots, and she comes in and says, "I want a short, sassy haircut." Well, of course, this gorgeous hair, I'm in tears as I'm cutting off the braid that I had made. But we ended up donating it to the Locks of Love for the cancer patients. But she was so excited to be an American. She goes, "Okay, now I'm an American." And I thought, they understand. And that's what I wish we would see more of, those that are coming over here, instead of waving their old country's flag and giving us the bird because they're not getting everything they think we owe to them. That upsets me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, okay, I'll jump off my soapbox now.
Yeah, I understand. I think that's because what you're saying is people are coming with a sense of gratitude, a sense of humility, the idea that this is something to nurture, protect, and continue to build for their children and future generations.
Exactly. And that's what this country is. We're supposed to be the great melting pot, not a tossed salad like I call it nowadays, where nothing's really mixing, It's quite sad. Okay. Now, as a Texas State Representative, Mr. White, what is your vision you have for Texas?
My vision for Texas is that the people of Texas have a society where they can achieve their dreams in a environment of liberty, prosperity for their families and for their communities. And that means a society where government is doing constitutional things, but government in of itself is not very consequential in their lives, because government is focused on a few things like maintaining and improving and building upon our public infrastructure, making sure that we have a less burdensome yet certain regulatory environment. We have a civil justice system that is based on justice and not jackpots for a few trial attorneys, where we have an educational system that gives parents the confidence that their children are being developed intellectually for this 21st century high-wage, high-tech global economy, and that our communities remain safe in order for all of this to happen.
I like that. I like that vision and goal. That's excellent.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, very much. This is why I proudly voted for you.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a last question because I've kept you on here probably long enough. You probably have other exciting things to be doing. But
okay,
now,
looking at the snow.
Looking at the snow, I know. I'm looking out my window at it too. Folks, it snowed here in Southeast Texas today. Shame on it. Anyway, as an organization that I'm involved in, the America First Coalition, how can we help people such as yourself, elected officials such as yourself, to help President Trump drain the swamp? What can we do to help you as an elected official?
Well, we must continue the reforms, okay? And what do we mean by the reforms? We have to get back to the Constitution, all right? We have to understand that every man and woman that wakes up in the morning and they are grooming themselves for their day at work in their mirror, you are the government. One of the things that just kind of irks me is on the state level, when we're talking about funding education, everyone is saying the state should pay more, the state should pay more. Now, I think I know what they mean by that, but, Linda, who is the state? It's you and I.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like there's another group of people out there called the state of Texas, and they're writing checks. It's us. So this form of government, because the people are truly the governors, it requires 24/7 vigilance. You can't, You can't take a day off from governing. President Trump doesn't take a day off from governing. Greg Abbott doesn't take a day off from governing. I don't take a day off from governing. So it has to be 24/7 full contact vigilance. Okay. One thing that we learned from President Reagan, and with the technologies that are out there now, I think this is what Trump is attempting or trying to do, is that you have to teach and say it every day. You cannot assume ever that the people get it. When I was in the classroom teaching, I never assumed that my kids got it. It was every day you have to drive home certain principles. You can't assume that the people get it. Okay? So every day we have to talk about why is it important for our nation's prosperity, security, values, and interests to have strong border security. Why is it important for the business community, even before Congress even passes a tax cut, know that the president's value in reducing and eliminating burdensome regulations, why that means so much for you. You know, the criticism that the tax bill is taking right now, the tax relief, tax reform bill. And I just ask people, is there anybody here that cannot use $50 to $100 of extra income?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if you're a middle class, working class family, you tell me you can't use $50 to $100 per month. I mean, okay, income extra a month, and then some.
Right.
Okay, that $1,200 I think is almost half the amount that you can, or at least a substantial amount that you can lop into. What do you call these things? A 401k.
Right.
Okay, or some type of investment tool for your kids. So you have to drive that home every day, because what's happening now is Congress and the president have passed their tax reform, tax relief bill. Guess what the people of Texas are now saying?
Really?
Say you, state legislature. Say you, state legislature. Now, what are you going to do?
Right.
Now, you've got to step up your game now, okay? Every day, good people like yourself, you have to pound why it's so important that, you know, we have a strong military. So I rely on you to make the case every day, and when you make it to a few new people every day.
Excellent. I guess one of my biggest pet peeves about politicians, many politicians, I'm not going to say all of you because you're not that way, but many politicians today seem to think they have a never-ending bank account to write checks on. You know, I always joke and say they seem to think, I can't be overdrawn, I still have checks. And they will say that they have to spend millions upon millions on something that doesn't really benefit the majority of the people. It just benefits whoever's going to, whatever lobbyist is going to toss them a little extra bone. You know what I mean? And it's sad.
Yes. Well, thank the framers of the Constitution in the past with the 1875, which is the Constitution that we're governed under now, the Constitution of 1875, which required in some form or manner a balanced budget. I think some things that I think would serve Congress well. Now, obviously, they are a national legislative body, and there's probably a reason for them to meet around the year a little longer than a state legislature. I kind of say maybe the national legislature, the Congress, may need to meet a little less, and the state legislatures may need to meet just a tad bit more. Okay, so I think what would serve the Congress better as far as their favorability among the people is if they would kind of shorten the time that they're up there. You know, just say, hey, we're going to go up there for 3.5 or 4 months, and we're going to get it done. And if you don't get it done, there's probably a reason why. It didn't need to get done, okay? It didn't need to get done. I think in many state legislatures where we meet just several months a year or several months every other year like we do in Texas, in some instances it has served Texas well.
Yeah.
Because as a legislator, and our Constitution helps us out with this, I only have one bill that I need to pass, and that's HB1, SB1, the budget.
Yes.
If nothing else gets passed, I have done my constitutional duty by passing the state budget. And then, of course, we have the balanced budget requirement on the state legislative end. So I think when sometimes our frustration with Congress is that it seems like they're up there all the time. Nothing is getting done. At least I can say as a state legislator, if something's not getting done, well, it's because we're not up there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And, I remember my first session, I was working a bill that was very important to my district, and at that time my district included Tyler, Angelina, San Jacinto, and Trinity counties. So it was very important in Angelina County because it was my largest county. It did not have any fiscal impact on the state or the local government, this particular bill. And for some reason, I did get the bill passed, but I just had some problems getting it on the calendar to be considered by the full House. It had already been through the Senate. And I went to Senator Nichols and said, man, look, can you help me out? I mean, do you know this guy over, do you know this lady who has this committee over here that can vote this bill out and let me bring it to the floor? And Senator Nichols said, that's a pretty important bill, but the state of Texas has survived for over 150, 180 years without it. And it'll probably survive another 2 years without it if it doesn't pass. Okay. And so I said, okay. Yeah. So, but we did get that bill passed. And so there are things that you kind of go into a session and that that are must-do things, you've got to do, beyond the budget. But we file about 7,000 to 8,000 bills between the House and the Senate collectively, and maybe a little less than 1,000 get over the line, and most of those are corrective in nature. They're not like totally new statutory provisions, so they may change a shall to a may, or they just may totally eliminate statute. Not just add statute, okay? So they're corrective in nature. So that tells you something, and the legislative process is designed to frustrate and stop a lot of stuff, not get a lot of stuff over the line. And I'm thankful for that. And I have to remind my constituents when they don't get what they want, I said, well, I actually spend most of my time stopping bad stuff. And let me also say that, Linda, and let me say this, Linda, and this is especially a lot of my Tea Party folks, and this is what they fail to forget, because they say, well, this didn't get done, and that didn't get done. You guys didn't pass this bill. You didn't get this done. I said, but understand, because of the strong principle stands that people like yourself, you and yourself and others take, Linda, you guys stop a lot of stuff, bad stuff from happening. Okay, and again, my state senator, Senator Nichols, as he would say, we have survived pretty well without those bills, and we'll probably make it another year without them. So hang on.
Well, to be honest with you, I think sometimes the less stuff passed, the less us American taxpayers have to worry about. That's what I like about Texas. You guys aren't up there trying to do a million things at once, and then we get sideswiped with it. I appreciate that.
Yes, I think it was Bob Bullock giving some political advice to George W. when he was still governor, and he said, "Look, the Texas, the people, they're not looking for the second coming of Christ. They're just looking for a few men and women to go up there and take care of a few basic things and get out of their life. That's all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
There's no reason for the legislature or any politician to think that they have to swoop in. Look, we've done well as a country with, going back to your term limit, our term limit discussion. Surprisingly, we've done well without Sam Houston. We've done well for 3-4 decades without George Washington. So many of these people that think that for some reason they are so indispensable, more indispensable than Lincoln, Washington, Sam Houston, it's just ludicrous. Okay, let somebody else play those roles sometime.
I can understand that.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
There's some other ones out there. Let them. There's another Eisenhower like that. Let him get in and do some things sometime. And what are you saying about your other citizens that you think that you're so indispensable that you can never leave?
Exactly. Yeah, it's just, it makes me feel good to know that there's people such as yourself serving in Austin, representing, our little corner of Texas over here. And because there is a push to strip away a lot of those things that we've come to love about this country. And if we don't stand up and fight, everything that you and I grew up believing is going to be gone. And what are we leaving behind for our children and grandchildren?
Right.
I look at my grandchildren all the time and I think, that's what got me involved in the America First Coalition. That's why I joined this. I mean, it's a lot of hard work and a lot of hours, but every time I look into the eyes of my grandchildren, I think, what am I leaving behind for them? And I want them to enjoy the freedoms. I'm tickled to death that here in Southeast Texas in the school, the children still say the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag before class. They say the pledge to the Texas flag. My grandchildren are taught that when you see somebody in a military or a police uniform, you thank them for their service.
And you respond to them with yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and yes, sir.
Yes.
That.
Yes. All of my grandchildren, that's how they have to respond. I'm very proud of my children for teaching their children how to do that. I remember one time I took a couple of them to Dairy Queen here in Woodville. They wanted some ice cream. It was a hot summer day, so we loaded up, went to Dairy Queen. Well, there happened to be a couple of police officers sitting in there eating their lunch. And without even saying anything, they go, Grandma, can we go over there? And I said, what do you want to do? They go, we want to tell them thank you. I said, sure. So they walked over there on their own, and they thanked those two officers for their service and everything. And they just looked over at me with a look of shock on their face, And I didn't prompt them. I didn't tell them to do it. They just did it totally on their own. I remember one time we were all gathered together. I think it was Thanksgiving, and had the football game on in the background. This has been about 3 years ago, before all this other stuff started, and it got really quiet in the living room. All the grandkids were sitting in the living room around the coffee table, while the big folks had the big table, and all of a sudden it got really quiet in the living room. When you have children, little ones, the oldest one at that time was 8. So got really quiet, and everybody turned and looked, and all 4 of them were standing with their hands on their hearts while the national anthem was being played. I broke out in tears. I was so proud. So that's what we have to teach our young ones. We have to teach them to love this country. Yep. So anyway, wow. I tell you what, I am so thrilled that I got this opportunity to talk with you today. You have answered my questions with passion and
yes, ma'am.
True faith, and I really appreciate it. Is there any last thing you would like to tell the listeners today?
Hey, look, especially to my constituents in Hardin, Newton, Jasper, Tyler, and Polk counties, we're very honored and proud to have the opportunity to represent them in the Texas House of Representatives, and I just know that as God continues to bless them, through them, God will continue to bless this great state of Texas.
Oh, thank you so much. Everybody, this is Texas House District 19 Representative James White. He's a great patriot, a great man, and I'm very honored to have him be my representative in Austin, Texas. So thank you so much again for your time. I hope we get to speak again sometime.
Let's do it.
All right. I would like to keep up on you and see what's going on. Now, if there's anything we can ever help you as an organization, just feel free to contact us. That's what we're here for. Thank you again. I appreciate your time, and enjoy this snowy day here in Southeast Texas.
We will. We will. All right.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Linda.
Bye-bye.
Looking forward to it again. Bye-bye.
All right.